Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the next episode of the Rocky Mountain MyRec Short Takes on Suicide Prevention podcast. I'm your host, Adam Hoffberg, and I am really looking forward to my chat today with our guest, Dennis Gillan. Well, welcome, Dennis. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Adam, as we speak right now, I am in my hometown of Greenville, South Carolina. So you're in the mountain zone, I'm in the eastern time zone, but our cause covers all time zones, unfortunately. And I'm looking forward to this conversation because you and I planned this a couple months ago, and new data just came out yesterday regarding completed suicides, and it's obvious we have much work to do.
Absolutely. So I hope that today we can cover a good amount of information on the background of suicide and really spend a lot of today focusing on the message of hope that you are such an ambassador for. So before we jump into that, I think it's important that we take a moment to acknowledge your personal connection with suicide and suicide loss, and also why you're so passionate about this topic. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. And when you get into suicide prevention business as a non-professional, I am not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I want to say that right up front. What happened, it's one of those causes that you don't find it finds you. I was a junior at West Virginia University when the phone rang. It was a Wednesday. I can remember it like yesterday. And I'm one of 5 kids. And it was my younger sister, Janice, telling me that you need to come home. Mark died. And they told me Mark died in a car accident, but they didn't know. My family did not know what to tell me. You all know why we're here today to talk about suicide prevention. I lost my older brother, Mark, to suicide. He battled depression for years, and Mark died by suicide. And Adam, if we were to stop right there, the story would be sad enough. Because one suicide is way too many. But 11 years later, just when I thought we were out of the woods, remember I told you I'm one of 5 kids. It was Sheila, Mark, now deceased. It was me, Janice, and Matthew, my younger brother. And 11 years after we lost Mark, in a drunken stupor with access to lethal means, I lost Matthew to suicide. So your listeners are listening to a guy that lost not one but 2 brothers to suicide, and I swear I wish the topic were different. It's brutal.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that, and I absolutely commend you for your courage and for channeling your grief in such a positive way for this field of suicide prevention. So again, I really appreciate you sharing that story and your connection and having you on the show today.
Well, I appreciate that. And for your listeners out there, it wasn't like an overnight conversion. I had 16 years, I didn't even talk about my brothers. I couldn't say their names, and I couldn't say the word suicide without just losing it. It hurt that much. And then when I lived in Chicago, as I told you, I now live in South Carolina. When I lived in Chicago, I worked on the suicide prevention helpline, the 800-273-8255 number for suicide prevention services out of Batavia, Illinois. And that helped me on this healing journey. I was starting to help other people. And then when I came down to South Carolina, I got involved in a couple nonprofits, and one time they asked me to speak about my losses. And that's what started this whole public speaking. I thought I was done. I spoke about my brothers once at one of those wonderful Out of the Darkness walks put on by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and I didn't want to speak about it, very reluctant. And when I sat down later, someone came up to me and said, "You need to tell that story more often." And I started laughing because I said, "Oh, that's it. I'm done. That's a one and done show right there, folks. I can't talk about them again." And then here I am speaking professionally, going coast to coast, talking about my brothers. It's just funny how it all worked out. But I want your listeners to know that, when you're grieving like I was, I didn't turn around the next day and say, "We got to do something about this." I was hurting for certain. And I went into my man cave for a long time and let the grief do its work. I ended up raising a family. I have 2 boys, married, since divorce, getting remarried. Life came at me. But finally, when I felt the urge to help, the suicide prevention helpline was there, and then getting more active with nonprofits helped a lot.
Well, I think when we talk about suicide prevention, there's so many angles we can take, so many potential topics we could discuss, and I think for today we really wanted to talk about suicide prevention for men. And this talking about men in mental health and men as an underserved population in mental health, I think it's just so important. And I'm wondering if you could start with giving us a little bit of the sort of lay of the land with men and mental health and why suicide prevention for men is so particularly important.
Sure, and that's a great question, Adam, because I lost two guys, and so it's personal for me. And for any other listener out there, the minute I go on one of my man rants about 78% of all completed suicides are men. I want to say that again: 78% of all completed suicides are men. And I will go on a rant about this, and then I'll run into somebody that lost their sister or their aunt or their daughter, and my heart breaks just the same. One is too many. I think we're all in agreement on that. But that 78% number, if we're ever going to move the needle on completed suicides, and in the 2017 data was 47,173, and that's where I'm getting the data now, where I'm getting that 78% number. The new data that's out, it's disappointing because it went up to 48,334. I don't have the actual percentage of men in that data yet because it's still new. But it's going to be around 78%. Let's be honest. It's we don't talk about it. Pride kills, and guys, we just don't open up about this stuff. So I'm glad you picked that angle. It's an angle that needs to be worked. Again, if we're going to make a real dent in this number, we got to look at men.
Yeah, when you hear that, it really is just powerful. And again, we don't want to focus too much on the numbers. As you mentioned, each one of these numbers is a life lost, somebody's loved one, and somebody we truly care about. So I want to honor that, and again, just honor your personal connection as we kind of continue this conversation, because at the root of this is a person. But it's important to look at these sort of epidemiological numbers to really get an understanding of the extent of the issue, and also help us sort of focus in our resources for suicide prevention. And so clearly, men are a big group that we need to focus our efforts.
You're being so kind, Adam, and I appreciate it. I'm sitting there thinking, going, man, we suck at this. That's I'm a very simple man. I'm like, we're not good at this, and we need to be better at talking about our emotions and mental health. And I think the tide's turning. I really do. I'm forever hopeful. Yesterday, I did a radio show locally here in Columbia, South Carolina, and we took a bunch of phone calls. I kid you not, every call that we took was a guy except for one. And that's not the case usually. Usually we don't want to talk about it. So the popular term being thrown around the suicide prevention world is we're at a tipping point where maybe the guys are going to come out and say, well, we got to talk about this. And I've seen it in the last 5-6 years. I went to a couple meetings, and recently I got back from a leadership meeting in Denver that went over suicide prevention with the good folks at AFSP. And I'm telling you, I saw more guys than I've seen in a long time. And I was really like, all right, cool. This is, there was a day I was like one of 3 guys in that room, and more are starting to show up. So I'm grateful for that, and hopeful.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about what might be driving this a little bit before we transition to how we can help it. As you mentioned, there's a fair amount of cultural sort of baggage that comes along with being a man and seeking help, and maybe loneliness, isolation. Could you just kind of talk us through those a little bit?
Oh yeah, and then men as a whole, we don't talk about our emotions. We've been told our whole lives, stop crying, walk it off. I remember getting hit by a ball in Little League, and the coach's advice was walk it off. I'm like, all right, it kind of hurts. Stop crying, get down to first base. We need to run. I'm like, all right, put it aside. And that's, we've been told for a long time to, put it away, put your emotions in a box and don't worry about it. And I think we're seeing the fruits of that. It's not very healthy. It's not a good coping mechanism. And then you heard me speak about my brothers, and I did not talk about means at all. And I do not in my talk about means. I try to avoid it. Some folks yesterday on the phones were talking. I don't talk about it. Gone is gone in my book. But we'd be remiss if we didn't say the use of firearms with men is high, and there's no turning back from that. It's a forever decision. They say firearms account for roughly 50% of all completed suicides. I'll just tell you that holds true in the Gillan family. So we choose lethal means, and there's no coming back. It's truly a forever decision. We walk into the woods and we don't walk out, and that's sad, um, super sad. And every stat we have is a person, and we need to really make a difference and get some of these 48,000 people back from the edge.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and that comment about lethal means is particularly true in the veteran world as well. And coming from the angle of the VA research, we know actually that number is up to 69, 70% of veterans die by suicide using a firearm. And so it must be stated that the lethal means issue is a big piece of this pie.
Yeah, and your numbers are higher than the general population in the VA world, and that makes sense, 69 to 70%, because the access to means, and especially out west and here in South Carolina, a lot of people hunt and all that. So guns are here and they're readily available. The biggest thing we're talking about now in the gun, you start bringing up firearms, people right immediately bow up a little bit. We're not talking about seizure. We're talking about safety, and that's a big difference. I just want you to lock your stuff up. I had to sit with a guy, and often this happens. Uh, if somebody loses a brother or something, they'll call me up and say, "Can you talk to this person?" I said, "Sure, I'll talk to him. I've been down this path." And this poor guy lost his brother because his dad kept a firearm on his nightstand, loaded. And I'm sitting there going, being as compassionate as could be, but inside my head going, "Wow, if he separated the bullets from the firearm and had a gun lock, we wouldn't be having this conversation." But he left it literally on the nightstand. He goes, "Oh, we live in a rough neighborhood." I said, "How?" In my head, I'm going, "How many times have you ever been broken into?" Probably none. Um, uh, that's what a dog's for. My uncle didn't get a dog, and a real mean one. But that was so sad to hear that the father who now has to deal with that. Imagine the personal hell he's in mentally, that his son took his unlocked firearm and used it. It's got to be brutal. My heart breaks for everyone involved.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like there's so much to unpack with all of that, but I do want to kind of transition into sort of why I asked you to come onto the show, which was watching your TED Talk. I'm a member of the American Association of Suicidology listserv, and which, by the way, I encourage any of our audience to subscribe to. It's free, open to the public, and you get lots of wonderful, engaging conversations around suicide prevention. Sometimes folks disagree, but you get to see sort of both sides of the issue and many viewpoints. Anyway, so Dennis, you posted this link to your recent TED Talk on loneliness and hope, and uh, I just was a bit frozen for a few moments after watching it and really soaking it in, and listeners will definitely link out to that so you can watch it as well. But I wonder if you could just tell us about your process there, why you chose this topic, and a little bit about your talk.
Sure. I had a friend that was done in Hickory, North Carolina, and I have a friend of mine who prompted me to, you should submit your talk to that. And I didn't want to do my talk. And in my normal keynote, like you and I did right now on this podcast, I talk about my brothers up front because I need to get them out of the way. For me to perform, it's hard to talk about, so I get it done early, and then we move on to like warning signs and this. But for this TED talk, I decided to tackle a topic that affects a lot of people. And I had to watch my dad go through this. He recently passed at 83 years old, but as you get older, you lose friends. I think Thomas Joyner down at FSU talked about that in one of his books, Lonely at the Top. As we get older, we tend to lose friends. And I'm really, um, watching out for that in my own life. I'm a high alert. Like, Dennis, stay in touch with people. It's work. And if you're an introvert, extrovert, it doesn't matter. It's still work. So when they said do the TED Talk, I started thinking about this loneliness thing, and I literally watched a Japanese documentary called Dying Alone. And when I say I watched it, I had to watch it because it had subtitles. I mean, it wasn't one of those things you put on Netflix and you walk away and empty the dishwasher. You had to sit there and watch it. and read it. And it was sad because these guys were dying in Japan and nobody knew about it. The opening scene was they were cleaning up this guy's apartment, older fella, and nobody knew about it for 7 to 10 days. And that bothered me. I'm sitting there, I'm in my apartment alone going, I hope that doesn't happen to me. Um, so that's where I started looking at this loneliness stuff, and I started looking at strategies to combat loneliness. And thankfully, I caught myself. I've done some of them. You know, flashback a couple of years ago, I got a divorce and moved from a big house to a small apartment in a town I did not know anyone. It was part of a planned, reboot for myself, and I was going to be closer to my kids, so I moved up to Greenville, South Carolina, from Columbia, an hour and a half away, and I found myself alone a lot. So that's why I wanted to do the TED Talk. I actually went through it, and I took some of these strategies and tried to get out of it. Like joined a hiking club. I took a class, an improv class. I was looking for any excuse to get out of this tiny apartment I could, and it helped in my recovery. And that TED Talk was brutal because I didn't talk about my brothers until the end. So the whole time I'm on stage talking about this, going, oh my gosh, I got to talk about Mark and Matthew. And you saw it, Adam, and there's a tone shift. And I said, remember those two guys I talked about? And my voice is starting to crack thinking about it. I watched my own TED Talk and I cried because I can't believe it's me that this happened to. I can't believe when they introduced me, they say, here's a guy who lost two brothers to suicide. I'm like, oh, that poor guy. And then they say, ladies and gentlemen, Dennis Gillan. I'm like, oh, it's me. But that's life. It happens. It happened, and we go on. But that TED Talk was brutal because I knew it was coming, and I could see my slides coming up. And there's a picture of Mark and Matthew. I'm like, how am I going to get through this? I got through it. 17 minutes. You saw it. It had a pretty good ending. And the bottom line is, and spoiler alert, it's not that I don't want to die alone. I don't want to live alone. And that's what the crux of the whole talk is. We don't want to live alone. And I think in the suicide prevention world that we all live in, and you mentioned that listserv, and that's full of wonderful people with tips, research, a whole gamut, a whole spectrum of lived experience, loss survivors, and I'm constantly gleaning information from those folks. But the whole crux is, we don't want to live alone. So look at some of these strategies and go from there. So that's where the TED Talk went, and it was brutal.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think that was just brilliant to transition from we don't want to die alone to we don't want to live alone. I mean, it's so natural for us to want to connect, and I feel like there's just obviously, like you said, some people are more introvert. There's all these individual reasons why we sometimes isolate, and there's societal reasons, and it's just there is this commonality among all of us that we want to be a part of a group and a community, and I just that really struck me, and it's so simple. I mean, in some ways it's obvious, but in other ways it's like, oh well, here's an anchor point. Here's something we can latch onto. Okay, we all like to be connected, or we want to be connected. How can we actually do that? And maybe you could say a little bit more about that.
Sure. I found an article by a gentleman when I was doing my research, Ruben Castaneda for the USA Today. He came up with 9 strategies to combat loneliness. And I'm like, when I was thinking about my TED Talk, I didn't want to go up there and say, hey, we have a problem, and then walk off stage. Like, great, thanks, pal. You didn't help us with any tips. Tell us something we don't know. So I used Ruben's article to look at references. Like some of them were take a class. Number 8 was find a therapist, which I did. Talk to someone you think is lonely. All these strategies to combat loneliness. And I thought that was helpful. It was helpful for me, and hopefully helpful for the audience that watches it. Volunteer, all these really cool stuff. And then, I took on social media a little bit because that can isolate you. But one of the tips was use your smartphone as a phone. And I think I was talking to my kids when I said that one, because I text them all the time. I'm like, would you call me? So there were some really practical tips that I think anybody can do. So I didn't want to go up there and say, we're screwed, and then good luck. I thought I'd give them some hope and some practical, like you said, Adam, practical advice of what we can do while we're here on this planet so we don't live alone.
Yeah, yeah. One of them that resonated with me was that idea of like having some sort of group dinner or breakfast or lunch or whatever it is, just some kind of time to meet and eat. I think breaking bread with people, as they say, just like that idea that food can be something that unites us, and it's not like a high pressure situation. It's just kind of informal and getting together with a group of people and either making food, going out to eat, whatever it is. And I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah, I talked about that in the TED Talk, how a group of guys in my apartment building, we get together on the first and third Thursday of every month. And I kind of miss them because this month, January, when we're taping this, we had 5 Thursdays. And I miss these guys. So I'll see them next week. The last time we did it, we had 10 guys show up. So it tells me that there's a appetite for this. People want to connect. We send out a text. It's really simple, and anyone can replicate this. I don't have a monopoly on this. We send out a text, and we're guys. So normally, if it's Thursday, the text comes out Wednesday because we're late, and it says, right? But hey, it's tomorrow. Oh crap! And then we pick a place, and we just meet for breakfast. No agenda whatsoever. I'm in a Bible study. I don't want it to be that because sometimes people get turned off by that. It's not like we're going to do a civic project. We're going to clean. Nope, don't want to do that either. I just want to break bread with some dudes. And then a couple of those guys retired. They want to stay there all day, but I usually have to go to work. So I say, hey, guys, take care. And I leave. And I'm telling you, every time we meet, my day is better. I just have a spring in my step. That's how we start the morning. It's just awesome. And I'm telling you, the last time 10 guys showed up, we're like, oh, my God, we got to start a lunch group in addition to the breakfast group. We're getting too big. But people need it, and they keep showing up. So I'm going to keep doing it. Encourage your listeners, your vets. It's not that hard. Anybody can replicate this thing. It was me and another guy picking names, getting phone numbers, and coming up with a text chain. The text chain has about 14 guys with the hopes that 4 to 6 will show up because life gets in the way. You can't make it. But one thing we decided to do, Adam, is keep it consistent. First and third, first and third, first and third. So people get ingrained. So it always happens. Whether one person shows up or all 14 shows up, it's going to go on. You need to get a group, Adam.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, like you said, it can be replicated. I'm imagining, breakfast might be a little harder with my circle of people, but maybe, figuring out a dinner. And again, we all try to do it. And I think life gets in the way sometimes. And just, I was just encouraged that, like you said, you make it a priority, you make it a regular thing. And then, next thing I'm imagining there was a group of friends. Some were not even friends; they were just people that kind of got picked up along the way. But we would have like a little poker night, just sitting around a table. Yes, you're playing cards. In this case, it was just playing wasn't for real money. Just hanging out and you don't know what all these different conversations, connections, and there's just many forms it can take. But I like the idea of it, and it just resonates. And I think maybe even particularly resonates for men that may be listening.
Oh, yeah. And what you did there with your poker night, guys, back to the guy thing, guys will talk while they're doing something. I put a basketball court in my old house, so I would talk to my sons as we're shooting hoops. They would tell me stuff when I'm at school. We got a ping pong table where our dining room should be because I told my ex-wife, so listen, the boys will talk as we're playing ping pong. We don't need a dining room table. And she said, do it. Because with boys, and this is classic, when I would text them or get them in carpool and say, hey, guys, how was school? You know this, Adam. I got one-word answers. Good. You put a girl in the car, I found out everything what's going on in school, but the boys wouldn't talk. But we talk like your poker night. People would say something. Hey, I'm starting a new job. In between hands, like, hey, where you're working? Hey, let me know. I know some friends in that industry, and that's how it works. Guys will talk. That's why our breakfast club works. We talk while we're eating. Everybody needs to eat. Everybody needs to talk.
Yeah, well, yeah. Again, thanks for sharing this and sharing your practical tips. What else? Anything else you wanted to make sure we covered from either your TED Talk or just kind of like, from your experiences and being out in the field, any stories maybe that you heard from somebody when they came to a talk of yours and really kind of showed the impact that these things can have?
Oh yeah, one time I had a kid. I was at the University of Delaware, and they brought a couple. Sometimes they'll have students come up on stage, and we vet them. We try to use the proper language. Like you and I so far have not said the word commit. We try to stay away in safe messaging. And this kid got up on stage, and he told a powerful story of a kind word that he's on this planet today because somebody said nice shoes to him. He was wearing these sneakers, and I remember I hear stories like that all the time. Like a well placed kind word has altered somebody's path in a great way. Um, and unfortunately, the converse of that is true. When someone is mean, like they are on the interweb a lot, it could throw someone the other way. So I hear tons of stories. What's interesting, when I do my talk, I don't do Q&A because it's such a tough subject, and we end on a high note, and I walk. But I tell the kids I'll stick around as long as you want, usually if I'm at a college. And I remember I went to Georgia Southern University. I was done at 8 o'clock. Those kids hung out. I did not get back to my car at 10:30. They want to talk about it. They want to talk about it. And Adam, what you can help me with your vets, your veterans, and some other folks, the numbers for completed suicides for men 44 and higher, that age group, I really can't figure out how to get those folks in a room per se. I've done some church barbecues. Again, back to the food theme. We had to lure them in with food. That's a tough crowd to get assembled. The colleges, sometimes they make it mandatory. I've spoke at some like fraternity groups where it's all dudes, and I love it because they're younger. But that really at-risk group of middle-aged men, and I'm 56, so I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody and saying you're old. I'm right there. These are my people. I can't figure out how to get a really solid group of them in a room. Now, the construction industry, which has a high rate of suicide, they've taken on this, and they're doing really good stuff with those guys in safety meetings. They're putting under the guise of safety, and they're doing some really cool stuff and getting those folks in a room. But if you or your listeners can help me out here, that's a high-risk group. Where do they meet? What do they do? And how do I get a hold of them?
Yeah, really. That's very good food for thought. Like you mentioned, colleges are these places where people assemble, and of course there are older people in college too. But just the idea of where do you catch the men in their middle years, and I think with veterans at least, some of the veteran service organizations have a great community, and we've definitely tried to tune into some of their events and reach veterans in their middle years. But you're right. It's definitely a opportunity that's very ripe. And so, you mentioned, hey, listeners, if you have an idea, we would love to hear it. So feel free to reach out to us. We'll definitely put Dennis's contact information. I love thinking of this podcast as also maybe an incubator for ideas, and hopefully maybe somebody has some great idea up their sleeve that maybe thinking about how we can specifically reach men in their middle years. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that keeps me up at night. So thank you for posting that, Adam. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, Dennis, as we wind down today, first of all, again, I just want to thank you for coming on to the show. But I did want to leave on a high note. And as you mentioned, there's all these inspirational stories you hear, and I'm wondering if you have any words of wisdom in your experience that you want to leave us with for today.
Sure, I got this poem that's on my refrigerator. It's staring me in the face, and I love this one. I'm going to start using it in some of my talks. It's about sorrow. And, I went through two really rough periods of my life with the loss of Matt and Mark. And what did I learn from it? So this guy, Robert Browning Hamilton, has this really short poem, and it goes like this. He goes, I walked a mile with pleasure. She chatted all the way, but left me none the wiser for all she had to say. I walked a mile with sorrow, and ne'er a word said she, but oh, the things I learned from her when sorrow walked with me. And I read that, and I was like, wow, I learned a lot in some of my darkest places. And I also learned that the light is coming. Just hang in there. The light is coming. Stay with us. So when I read that poem, I was like, wow, this guy's speaking to me. You will learn a lot from your sorrows. And everyone who's listening to this podcast has had them. but they also make you a better person. Let the grieving process do what it has to do, and you'll come out the other side more empathetic. And that's what we need in this world right now. We need more people with empathy and caring, which means stay off the internet because you don't find much of it there. Um, but when I read that poem, I was like, this guy is speaking to me. So hope that helps somebody.
Wonderful. All right, folks. Well, that's going to wind it down for today. Once again, this was Dennis Gillan, and we'll include some links out so you can learn a little bit more about Dennis and the important work he does for suicide prevention. And thank you again for being on the show today, Dennis.
Adam, and thank you for all that you all do. Thank you very much for doing this.
You're welcome. All right, folks. Well, please tune in next time for more important interviews on work in suicide prevention, mental health, and resilience. And if you liked what you heard today, give us a follow, give us a listen, and share with your friends. And until next time, join us for more interviews on important work in suicide prevention.